Well, I'm happy to finally have on the show after a year of begging and pleading and getting him on here. Tommy Kendall, TK, thank you so much for joining me today on the Uber to the Pits podcast.
Well, thank you. Happy to join, and I like your focus. You know, you've got you got a lane that you're shooting for. That is, I think, information is in that world. There's never enough of it, and so hopefully this will be useful.
Absolutely. You know, TK, everybody knows you from, well, guys my age. We know you from your Trans Am days, your IMSA days, and then younger guys now they know you from the Torque Show, and being on the TV and giving us great commentary. But initially, how did you start into motorsports? What was your the needle in the arm that got injected and you've never been able to release?
Well, I mean, the funny thing, dating myself, when I grew up, Southern California. It's hard to even imagine what it was like, but it's instructive because of how little information you got. There
Yeah.
was obviously no internet. There was three TV channels, and there was, car magazines came out once a month and there was very little racing because it was 3 months old by the time it got to the magazines. And so it's a long way of saying if it didn't happen in your neighborhood as a kid, you literally didn't know it existed. Because back then I think there was maybe two or three races a year on TV.
Yeah.
Indy 500 was only on the radio originally. It was blacked out, and it was delayed. It wasn't live. It was delayed. There was Daytona 500 starting in the late 70s was on TV, and maybe Monaco Grand Prix on Wide World of Sports. And so it wasn't, and so it's hard to even fathom what that was like. So, anything with cars. I was into dirt bikes and boats first because we used to go to the Colorado River water skiing, and I had a mini bike and didn't really know there was such a thing as being a race car driver.
Yeah.
And then uh, my dad was always into cars, and we did car stuff together. And then when his business started doing well, all of a sudden he started indulging his love of cars and buying a sports car here or there, and that quickly kind of escalated. Our neighbor was the Porsche dealer in North Hollywood that sold cars to McQueen and Redford and Newman. A guy named Pete Smith, Bob Smith Porsche Audi, and so he started telling my dad what to buy, and then he said, "You oughta get a race car." And my dad's like, "Race car? I don't have a license." He goes, "Oh, you can go to a racing school, and I'll drive it for you in the meantime." Which, that works, right?
Yeah.
Pitch similar deals. And then when I went to my first basically auto race, it was Sears Point 1980. I was 13 years old, and I flew up with my dad and watched Pete Smith drive his car.
And just
And
just
like,
let people know what Sears Point is. It's now Sonoma. Used to be
yeah,
Infineon. So it went Sears Point, Infineon, Sonoma.
good catch. Yes, so Sonoma Raceway, and so I went up there, and it was an IMSA race in 1980, and it was like all of a sudden that was really my introduction to the world of car racing.
Yeah.
And so my mind was blown, and it's literally all I could think about from that point on. So that's kind of a late start, and also reframe things. You could not drive a car. You couldn't get a racing license until you were 18. And so I got into go-karts when I was 15, found a loophole to get into cars because the Jim Russell Racing School allowed you to race in their series only as long as you were 16.
Yeah.
And so it was just really hard to get. There wasn't track days. There was nothing like that. So it was racing school, and then the SCCA at age 18 is where you could go. And so the Russell Series was a godsend because it was super competitive spec racing, but it was also, as a spec series, it was relatively affordable. And because it was spec, it just so happened there weren't so many places. There was just a ton of really good guys. It turned out that went on to have good careers. Johnny O'Connell was in the same class as I
Oh
was,
wow.
not class, but the same group
Yeah.
that were racing at the time. Jeff Krosnoff, Ken Twaits, Mike Groff, Danny Thompson, Mickey Thompson's son.
Hmm.
So David Kudrave, who ended up advancing, through Super Bs and getting briefly into Indy cars. So it's just a bunch of guys, and so it was super competitive. And so having a spec series with really high level competition really raised my game.
Yeah. And I was listening to another podcast, which is a very great one. And if none of my listeners aren't listening to this yet, you go download it. Dinner with Racers with Ryan Eversley and Sean Heckman. Great, great show. I was listening to the episode with Dennis Aussie. And I believe Dennis Aussie said that he would be around with your dad and you'd be in the pits there as a youngster running around.
Yeah, no, that's
And
true.
so it's kind of a funny connection between you and I, because my initial, part into motorsports too, my uncle was friends with Chris Cord.
Okay.
So in 86, 87, 88, I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. My uncle would take me to Riverside. We'd go to Willow Springs. We'd go to Laguna. And I was having the ability to hang out in the All American Racer pits with Chris Cord, Dennis Aussie, and Willie T. Ribbs.
Wow.
So it's like kind of, as widespread as this world is, and as many racers as there are in this world, it's still such a tight knit, family, small world situation.
Yeah, that is crazy small world. And Dennis was my first racing hero because he was one of the early drivers that drove with my dad.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was bad fast, and he was also, I mean, you could put him in a room with a bunch of parts and come back in 2 days and there'd be a car built. I mean, he knew that it was cold, which is rare in today's deal. And so, and he was also as literally humble and down to earth as you could get. So that was a great introduction to Guy. I said, you don't have to get any hole to be fast. You don't have to have airs. He was just super cool. And I was this kid. I must have been a bit of a pest. And they ribbed me a little bit, but they were good to me because I was always there. I was so excited. I had 10,000 questions and just wanted to be in the middle of everything, And so, but I learned a ton. I spent all those early years at Sears Point. Every summer I'd get to go to 1 or 2 races in the Midwest. So Elkhart Lake, Road Atlanta. I got to go to Daytona and Sebring a couple times. So, and I would just watch. I had a camera and I would watch everywhere, and I would just observe. And you could tell who the fast guys were and who they weren't. And so I started learning. Then I started reading books, asking questions, just devouring as much information as I could, which is kind of the first piece of advice I would give literally in any endeavor, but especially in racing, is just to learn as much as you can.
I love it when people come up to me and go, I have a stupid question. And I look back at them and I go, really, the only stupid question is the question never asked.
Yep.
Because you don't know how beneficial the question you may have actually. You may feel like it's stupid, but it could be the most informational question that you've ever asked in your life. You'd have no idea unless if you actually just go out and ask it.
Well, and you want to talk about shortening the learning curve. You can either figure it out yourself through trial and error, or you can take advantage of. Now there's a lot of resources, but again, because of the internet, there's so much stuff, and that was kind of an advantage for me back then. Is you had to work harder to get that information. It wasn't at your fingertips. And so because I was wired that way, I just had this insatiable curiosity. And my dad, I learned from him just on everything, is just his business and everything he was ever good at. He just approached with total focus and he was always, whatever you were doing, you needed to understand it.
Yeah, I was very lucky and blessed to have kind of technically my first informal driving coach, a guy named John Morton.
Oh yeah.
So, he had something to do with winning and driving these Datsuns and Nissans and stuff like that. So
for 60 years of winning.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So you go from being this, pesky little kid asking questions, which, I still feel that no matter what level you're at, as soon as you make that initial move into a new level, ask questions. Find the best drivers there, ask them, try to get as much input as you can. I know when I was on motorcycles, I always enjoyed riding with people that were better than I was because it made me strive to be better and ride better as well. Same thing with driving. Do lead follows with, better drivers learn better braking points, let her churn in points and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean that's the fastest way to learn is to observe in real time. But there's other ways, there's some, books. There used to be the Carol Smith books. I don't know, even know if they're still available. Prepare to Win, Tune to Win, and Engineer to Win. I think were the
Yeah,
three. And so I remember reading those, and it was talking about chassis tuning. And I remember reading early on, and I'd be like, ugh. I mean, it made zero sense to me. I mean, it was total Greek, but I just kind of just forced myself and to stick with it. And then also, I had nothing to relate it to because I wasn't driving yet,
yeah,
and so just it was all conceptual. But and then I remember driving, and early in my driving career, it's just the technique of driving is overwhelming, and it's coming at you a million miles an hour, and there was no CPU power left
yeah,
over to process what the car was doing, but I knew I needed to learn that, and so I'd be like, I don't feel anything, man. I'm white knuckling it, and but because I knew I needed to do that, eventually your brain slows stuff down. Eventually, some of the mechanics of what you're doing become second nature, and then you have a little brain power left over. So, it's reps and practice is important, but it's also doing it in a way that's methodical. You can either figure it all out yourself, or you can shortcut it by getting some good advice. And this is so obvious, but actually listening and actually putting things into practice, and we're all guilty of this, some to extreme degrees. You ask a question and you've got an opinion already of some sort, and so you listen to this person who's ostensibly good at it,
yeah,
and they tell you something, and you keep doing it the way you've always done it. And so I've had some people. I'm happy to give advice, right? But I've noticed some people don't listen to any of it, and some people actively try to implement it, and those are the ones that when they come back the next time, you're like, oh, I'm happy to give you more of it. And so
exactly.
it's just how the world works. So
So, all right, so you go from Jim Russell, you know, and what was your next progression from Jim Russell?
well, from Jim Russell, it was my dad had bought an my dad was racing IMSA cars. We had a shop with a couple full-time employees. He'd run the West Coast races and a couple East Coast races every year. And so he bought an older RX-7, and I was splitting it with my brother. And we'd do two endurance races together, and we'd each do two sprint races. So 4 races each, 6 races total for the car. And so I did that in '85. I did the Russell Pro Series. I did 4 GTU races. And then as part of the trade out for the third seat at Sebring, a guy named Max Jones, who went on to have a great career and then more recently ran Chip Ganassi's Winston Cup program
Mm-hmm.
up until this year. Anyways, he was kind of getting started. We traded out a few. He drove with us at Sebring, and I got to do a few showroom stock races with him. And so
Oh
I was
wow.
doing a little bit of different stuff. And so '85, I did all of those. And then '86 was my big breakout year. I was gonna do basically the same, but I overheard a call one day at the shop. My crew chief answered the phone. Hey, Clayton, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Clayton? There's only one Clayton I knew, and he ran the Malibu Grand Prix car that had won the championship the prior 2 years. And I heard my crew chief say, no, don't know of anyone. No, yeah, okay, fine. And I'm like, what was that? He goes, oh, Jack Baldwin just signed with Chevrolet, and they're looking for a driver for the Malibu car. And I'm like, and
Yeah.
so, long story short, they had some Mazda money, factory money, they had some Firestone money, and they were short a little bit of money. And basically, that amount of money was what we were going to spend to run 4 races in our older car. And that was an older car, but it was the championship car. And long story short, I ended up getting in that car first for Daytona and Sebring, and then it turned into a couple more races. And then I was leading the championship, and Mazda was really, to show you how much things changed, Mazda was totally resistant to the idea of a young driver. Whereas now it's the opposite. It's like they're like, he's 11, great. And then it turned into the full season, and I won my
Yeah.
first championship. I also won the Firehawk Championship the same year in a Nissan for Max, driving with Max. And then the next year, I basically was on salary, $1,000 a race for Clayton Cunningham, won the championship again, and was kind of off and running.
And during this time, you're studying at UCLA, right?
Yep. That
How
was
how was it balancing going to school and racing at the same time?
balancing is probably a little bit misleading because but basically my school was my sponsorship initially. My dad, early on after that first race I went to, and that's all I could see or think about from that point forward. And he saw that look in my eyes and he said, listen, this isn't something you can make a career at. This is not a job. You can't be a pro race car driver. So, it's something to do for fun, but you got to prepare for life. And so, as long as you get good grades and go to college and get good grades, I'll help you and we'll do as much as we can. And so that was my deal with him. And so that year when I won the championship and got hired the next year, I technically wasn't dependent on him anymore.
Yeah.
But I still stayed in school, but it was, I was on the road about 200 days a year. And, it took me a while to get through UCLA and it wasn't pretty, but I somehow, kept inching forward and pulled it off.
I'm going to be nice. You're UCLA, I'm USC, so I'm not going to throw any fisticuffs or low blows here, but especially since I used to live so close to UCLA when I was in Santa Monica there as well. I was talking to Mark Miller a few episodes ago and some other drivers, and it's like they found it so important that they want younger drivers that come up to them and say, well, I'm thinking about giving up college so I can focus on driving. I'm like, if you're able to and capable of doing both, do it, because the world is so small when it comes to paid drivers that you're better off getting an education right now, building that career and using that career to pay for your racing.
That's actually the single best approach to do it, to be quite honest. But apart from that, I didn't, just like most young people, you don't realize until afterwards that your parents actually are pretty smart most of the time. And so not only should you do it because you need something to fall back on, I'm totally convinced it made me a better racer.
And why is that?
Well, I've learned almost the more things you can understand gives you different contexts to see things, and because understand things. And so there's very few new ideas in the world. It's usually a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit. And so it's some of it is some of the classes I had were about, something else, but they taught you how to think well, or they taught you how to analyze well. And I don't even remember what the subject matter was, but they were, my math teacher through 4 years of high school was this guy that answered every question I asked him with a question.
Yeah.
And it used to infuriate me. And I was like, I'm just trying to finish this. Just tell me what to do. And he was teaching me how to think. And I've thought to try to track Mr. Hansen down, and I have not. But I realized how helpful that was for the rest of my life, teaching me how to think and teaching me how to figure stuff out. And that's the number one. Literally, if you had to have one skill to help you in life, it's how to analyze and figure stuff out.
So yeah, no, absolutely. And, especially when it comes to cars and, you do the same thing that I do. It's drivers and engineers, they like to talk with their hands, especially when you're going like this, helmets on, well, cars handle like this. And, having that attribute to really be able to understand different things actually about the car, or how to apply, different techniques to communication or setup or whatever it comes down to. I definitely highly agree with you on that.
Yeah, it literally, every aspect of being successful in every single endeavor comes down to asking the right questions. And literally the best question to ask is why does this work? You can emulate successful people without ever understanding why it works.
Yeah.
That'll get you so far, but it's the whole thing, give someone a fish, teach them to fish. And so whether it's the funding aspect, which is the single most critical piece of racing, understanding how to raise money. And when I was starting out, my idea of raising money was, oh man, my car would look so great with that logo on it. That was my idea of how to pitch something. Oh my
Yeah.
God, my car would look so great that way.
Well, and that's really how it used to be, especially when we had a lot of the alcohol and cigarette money in the industry. And then when, the whole stuff taking cigarettes and tobacco out and then limiting the type of alcohol you could advertise for a while, and then the financial crash of 2008, it's like, and now even 2020 of what's going to happen in 2021, 22 as companies rebuild because of the COVID-19 stuff going on right now. So yeah, the funds are tremendous.
Well, and so like I was kidding. I was like, my idea of how to help the company was thinking how great my car was going to look in a Seven Up livery or
Yeah.
Marlboro or whatever. But bottom line, if you solve a company's problem for them, which is how to make money, how to sell whatever they're selling, if you can solve someone's problems there, they'll give you money. Period.
No,
So
absolutely.
so so a big part of it is you need to understand their business because how do you propose a way to help them if you don't really understand what they're doing?
What is it exactly? What is it that you're going to be able to offer that's going to benefit the company? You know,
Yep.
especially maybe even understanding the type of business inside that they are. You could look at,
Yep.
Accurate. Oh, well, they're just a car company. Okay, but there's more to the Accurate. How is it that you're going to drive it so people are going to want to go buy the Accurate car or sell the Accurate car to their neighbors or whatever?
What is their brand proposition? What are they?
Exactly.
What are they? How do they see themselves? On and on and on. I mean, Townsend Bell is the single best hustler deal maker of our generation. He understands all that stuff. A lot of it's hard work and study, and some of it I think is intuitive, but a lot of stuff is just trial and error. He
Yeah.
just was, he, he'd find someone. I mean, you hear stories about it, and they wouldn't have any money, and they'd say, "But I can give you this." In one case, it was pages in a magazine, Men's Journal, I think it was. And he's like, "What do I do with these?" He didn't ask that. He's like, "I'll sell these to someone else." And he just banging the phones and just making stuff happen. So there's a lot of ways to do it. So that the money part of it is the most important part because nothing happens without money. It's easy, and I see a lot of young drivers that have had that drilled into them, and that's important. But it's not the only thing because the other side of it is how fast are you? And so if you're just great at raising money, you'll actually have a ride. If you can always raise money, you'll always have a ride.
Yeah.
It'll always be tied, but you won't do that well, and it'll always be tied to how much money you can bring. The other side of it is, I remember I had this epiphany. I have to give my wife credit. The only real lull in my career, or I had my accident, but in '93, after I signed with Roush and Ford, the end of '93, we didn't have funding, and Max was basically, you got to find money. And I'm like, what do you mean I got to find money? I'm factoring. He's like, we don't have enough money. And so I moved to Detroit, and I was hustling, and I wasn't good at it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying, and it was starting to affect my confidence in the car. And my wife said, the reason they hired you is because you're faster than everybody else. And that's, you being a nice guy is part of it. But the minute you're not faster than everybody else, they're going to find the guy who is.
Yeah.
So the money's important, but close behind it is you need to be fast, and you need to, and that fast has so many different meanings. Fast over one lap, fast without crashing, fast. There's all kinds of different fasts. But and that's such simple advice, but it's easy to get caught up in as a young driver having big personality, being funny, having a social media presence, all important, but at some point you got to deliver the goods too.
See, and that's where I think that Jordan Taylor has absolutely 100% succeeded.
Yep.
He's, absolutely hilarious with his social media.
Mm-hmm.
Very consistent, fast driver when, racing for Wayne Taylor. Haven't got to see him much this year with Corvette because of, being shut down. But, he definitely knows how to be out there, be funny, but yet personable and professional at the same time.
he and his brother are great examples. He also Ricky can't be Jordan.
Yeah.
But Rick, so that's another important thing is you got to find your thing, and it's got to be somewhat authentic and natural too, you know. And so there's only one Jordan Taylor. So Connor Daly is a big personality that's starting to get some attention now with the Twitch stuff. He was hysterical to listen to.
Oh yeah.
The Twitch stuff. So there's a ton of ways to do it. You could do it by just being really really interesting in a not flashy way. I mean, there's a zillion ways to do it. It's just look at all the different shows on TV, all the different podcasts. There's only one Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, and they've all figured out their lane, and it's driven by by what you're into. And,
exactly.
So
I know you did a lot with Mazda and the GTU series up until early 90s. And then what was your progression after GTU?
Yeah, it was, I mean, Mazda, it's funny how all-encompassing Mazda was, because the Russell stuff was Mazda powered at the time. There was no support really. And then I did the two seasons, 86, 87, where I won the title, 86, 87. I then signed with Chevrolet. They were launching a new GTU program. And so I won the GTU title for the third time for Chevrolet in 88. And then they moved me. And so Chevy was kind of my big, I mean, the Mazda was a break because it took me to professional and paid. And then Chevy was a break because it was a big time factory program and coincided with Chevy being back in racing officially for the first time. They were involved. It was all backdoor up until then. But so Herb Fischel really, took me under his wing. So it was GTU, then it was Trans Am, then it was GTP. And so, one in GTU, and then did Trans Am, one in Trans Am, did GTP, had my accident, which was, a real shame apart from the physical toll. That was that car that literally changed the game. First super high downforce prototype, and
my golden era car, like my bucket list cars to drive, is the Mark III AAR that completely annihilated GTP. The 787B.
The 70.
The 787B.
Oh yeah.
The Mazda.
Yep.
And then the Jag.
Okay. Well, the Intrepid that I drove launched the high downforce era, and then Toyota took it to another level.
Oh yeah.
Mark III. So
I was at Portland when Fangio completely annihilated Michael Andretti's track record there. I think it was a 3-second difference between the GTP car and Andretti's Indy time at PIR. And that's when they're like, wait, hold on, these things are beast.
Yeah, that was something people didn't realize. I think there was 4 or 5 tracks that Indy cars and GTP raced on that year. Portland, Laguna, Mid-Ohio, Elkhart. Maybe it was only 4. And all of them, the Toyota held the outright record faster.
Yeah.
And people, it's an interesting study because the IndyCar was quite a bit lighter, 300 to 400 pounds lighter, but didn't have the body of a prototype. The whole surface, it was so much wing area. The whole car was a wing, and so the drag to downforce efficiency was way, way, way better. Those open wheels out in the air are not very efficient. I'm of the opinion of, not being an expert, but I think a lot of the stuff going on in the front of a Formula One car is to get the air up and around the wheels, which are causing so much disturbance.
Exactly. For you, I know that, being around different tracks with drivers, I hear a lot of drivers complain about the car not doing what they want it to do, or can we change the car to the driver I am? For you being somebody that can go from a GTU car to a Trans Am car to a GTP car, what's your advice to the drivers about not making the car adapt to you, but you adapting to the car?
Well, it's helpful to be able to adapt to the car. Ultimately, the highest performance level will be getting the car in its optimal state. And so that was something that took me a while. Like I told you where I started, where I literally couldn't feel anything,
Yeah.
wanted to. And obviously, eventually you get pretty tuned into stuff. You get with some good people. What really made the difference for me eventually was I could adapt to different. I drove so many different types of cars. I was good at adapting, but what you the ideal is to figure out each car has its optimal style for that formulation, that set of rules, tire width to power. Like a cup car, a NASCAR has equal size front and rear tires. So that affects how you drive it over a road race car with big rear tires, smaller front tires, front engine, mid engine, whatever. What I'm not saying this super eloquently, but I said what would be most important is what is the optimal style for this exact formula of car, and then match your style to that. And then when you match your style to that, you're going to highlight the most important areas that need to be fixed. And so that's one of the key things. I've never really heard too many people talk about it this way. Um, After a debrief, you can complain about 100 things because there's three phases to every corner. There's four: braking, entry, mid corner, exit.
Yes.
And you could complain about all of them in every single corner of every single track. And so after a debrief, you've just told the engineer but of those, and this is something I learned to do, and I didn't realize I did it until my engineer told me years later that was the most helpful thing they ever had with the driver, is at the end of the debrief, I'd say, of all of those things, this is the most critical to going faster. Because you could spend a ton of time making this 100% better, and it would yield no lap time.
Yeah.
It would fix the complaint, but it wouldn't yield much. And so, spending your time on the highest value parts of the problem are what that was. So like in the Trans Am car, ended up, in most cars, braking is usually a huge piece of the equation. And that's where our biggest advantage was in Trans Am was under braking. And so eventually, once you've sorted out the optimal driving style, and the optimal style for that car, you're going to highlight the same things are going to kind of always hold you back in that type of car. And that's where you're going to focus the attention to make it better, 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 better. And every driver in the paddock is complaining about certain things, and their teams are trying to fix those things. Someone is working on the highest value pieces of it. And that's why they're advancing more. And it's not all driver directed anymore.
Yeah.
Because of so much data and the engineers, and they're combing over stuff. But I really do think that's a huge probably appreciated piece of the equation is you drive the direction of the development by your style. And so having the optimal style, which takes trial and error and understanding, some people just fall into it because they've driven the same car their whole life and it's just second nature, and they can't even tell you why they drive that way.
Yeah. And I think the other benefit that you had compared to a lot of younger drivers now, and even club drivers or HPDE drivers that want to make a move into racing, is your cars. It's not like the cars aren't mechanical, but your guys were more mechanical driver's aids versus the electronic driver's aids now. You guys were still able to do minimal brake bias from inside the car with the twist of the knob or whatnot, where everything can be, you could have 10 different brake settings that you switch through on your steering wheel. You have the ABS systems, you have the power steering. Do you think the electronical aids now help drivers get a little bit more courage, feel a little bit more braver driving the car than what is really their capabilities?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the car is doing a fair amount of work for you, and sometimes depending on your experience level, you might or might not understand how much it's helping you. So it might be bailing you out huge. It's, but it the figuring out how to go faster than everybody else still comes down to the person that understands it better.
Yeah.
Whether that's and I haven't spent a lot of time with traction control, but the little experience I had with it with the Viper, I'm like, you could spend a week of days doing nothing but tuning traction control. And so, and I just kind of started scratching the surface of that. So the challenge still is, how do you generate, you know, outsized performance relative to everyone else? And so one key thing, and it doesn't do any good to complain about. I mean, I like the era I raced in because the potential to figure stuff out that was hard to figure out existed more.
No, and
There
I
was,
mean, you even were able to have a long enough longevity of a career where you were starting to get into the basic, electronic aids, especially in the Vipers and stuff in the late '90s, early 2000s, where you could see that change compared to, what originally was with the GTU cars, the GTP cars, the Trans Ams.
yeah, I mean, I basically, I retired in 97 when I was 30. And then I drove a year in '04 because in the Jag and Trans Am, I drove the Vipers. But the serious part of my career was ended in 97.
Yeah.
But, so coming back was like coming into a whole different era. Um, what I was gonna say, it reminds me a little bit the iRacing and the sim side of the things. Like when we got ready for Le Mans, Kuno Whitmer of all of our guys, he was by far the fastest guy in a sim. And it's related, but it's actually a different skill set, and it's actually a valued skill set. I think going forward, if you are really really good in a sim, you're going to be that much more valuable to the team because a lot of the development takes place virtually now, and it's just a different level of sharpness. I had a neighbor that was a young kid, and I'm like, "What do you do for a living?" He's like, I'm a professional poker player." And I'd seen World Series of Poker and some of the legend guys, and he's like, "Ugh." He says, "I have played 10 times more hands than those guys have because I can play all day, every day, whereas they used to have to go to a tournament and play, and they'd play."
Yeah.
But he says just the number of reps, and so the way his mind was tuned, he part of it was he didn't seem to have a lot of respect for the legends, but the other part of it, it made total sense. He's like, "Listen, I've seen every setup 10 times more than they have."
No, exactly. I definitely agree with the sim. Getting in the sims, putting the laps in, especially on a new track that you've never been to. Especially if it can become if it's a track like Watkins Glen, where there's a lot of turns, undulations, off camber turns, stuff like that, compared to going out and wrecking cars trying to learn it. But I think that what also people need to do, and I think this is where CXC and SimCraft are great, is by making the full motion sims. So it doesn't allow them to just wreck and reset. Like the old games we'd have with like Gran Turismo and stuff like that, where we like, oh, I can drive this car 200 miles per hour, cut the corner, hit the wall, and I'm still going to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I know the first half of Nurburgring better than I know the second half. um, yeah. Now, the real Sims, the Viper Sim at Multimatic, when you crashed, it actually shook you up a little bit. There was
Yeah.
you had to get, and you learned that pretty quickly. There was basically an eject button that you wanted to make sure you hit before you hit the barrier. It would jostle you around a good bit. So, it's there's pros and cons of each. I mean, it's a little bit like someone that's blind or deaf. Their other senses get super heightened, and I think that's a piece of the sim that actually you don't have the internal gyro part. Even the full motion ones are good and getting better, but they're not totally the same yet.
No.
And so, but if your visual gyro is that much more is sharper, theoretically, if you're also getting the internal gyro that happens in the real car calibrated, it just seems like together, eventually that person can get to a higher level.
No, and I mean, Gran Turismo did their driver, uh, I guess their driver challenge, where they took the best gamers on Gran Turismo, worked with Nissan, put them through driving school, and there's actually a guy driving in the 24-hour Le Mans in the LMP car.
Yep. I judged the first season of the U.S. GT Academy with Danny Sullivan, and so
spin to win.
We were fascinated going in, like everybody else. It was such a great concept because everybody's like, even us was like, how's this going to work? How good are they going to be?
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting experiment. And you saw there was one guy, and I forget his name, who actually kind of slipped through the filter. They had limits on how much experience you could have in real life. He actually had a lot of karting experience, and we're like, and the first on-track piece was at a go-kart track, and he waxed everyone. Like,
yeah.
And we're like, well, what you'd expect. He had a hard time adapting to the cars. And so you had these other people that had literally almost never driven a car, and they adapted to the cars quicker than he did because he was so used to the karts. So it was really interesting, and there was no absolutes. The one guy that ended up winning, Brian Heitkotter, who ran and got some opportunities here, he had done a fair amount of autocrossing, but had never raced wheel to wheel.
Okay.
And so I early on said that is probably going to serve him pretty well because he had the super. He also won the gaming portion to get into it. He was the highest, but he also had enough real world calibration in his internal gyro that he was able to put it in practice.
No, and that's, I really think that's going to be something, like you said, is going to help out in the future, especially with a lot of the hand-eye coordination now and the way that, the wheels respond, and getting that feel will really translate in to the car.
No question.
So, if you, looking at your career, going back to your first pro year at Mazda, what would be the biggest piece of advice you'd give yourself now to that Tommy?
Probably, it went pretty well, but to prioritize race wins more. I was so focused on winning championships, and it served me well because I won 9 in 10 or 11 years. But sometimes I was in championship mode from the very first race. And so our timer, a lady named Chris Seifert, she still to this day gives me I used to keep the points total of all the drivers in my head in real time in the car, because that was the only way to accurately assess risk reward of every situation. And so I was constant, but in a way, like I said, if I'd have a lead 4 races in, all of a sudden now I'm racing for a championship. It was the most important thing. But Willie T was a good example. Willie T back then, there was a number of years where he didn't start the season with the team or whatever. And for whatever reason, he was usually in a situation where he couldn't win the championship, and he was just hammering every single race to win.
Yeah.
And I was so envious of that. And so it took me a while to really get the race win part of it down. I won a number of races, but it was always by them a little bit coming to me. I put myself in position, but my number one priority wasn't winning. And so at the end of the day, hauling ass and beating people head to head is what it's about.
Yeah.
The championships are what is celebrated, and that's probably best for your job. But the enjoyment part of it and the skill part is wheel to wheel and battling and competing.
Okay.
So it's a slight shift, but I'd tell myself earlier on, win races and the championships will come.
Right on. And then GTU, Viper, GTP, or Trans Am? Out of all the cars you got to race, what was your favorite one?
I mean, the GTP car thrill is ultimate. I mean, it's the fastest, 1,800 pounds, 4 to 5,000 pounds of downforce, 800 horsepower, just like otherworldly. Um, Super glad I got to race in that era of those that era
Yeah,
monsters. The Trans Am was where I originally viewed Trans Am as just stepping stone. I was hell bent for Indy cars or Formula One is where I was trying to get to, and then eventually the way it worked out, that's where I made my name and my career. But the first time through, I was just eyes past it. But all things considered, it's the perfect racing for me. Being a big guy, it was hard to share a seat, so
hmm
I like Daytona and Sebring, but it was always hard for me because I didn't fit in the cars that well with my teammates. Trans Am, the car was made for me. It was 100 miles, sprint races, hammer and tong, really cool package, big power. I look at the cars; they're kind of weird now. They were these slab-sided like funny cars.
yeah,
We had ourselves convinced that they related to the street cars because we had to because that's how our funding came. But when I look at them now, I'm like, wow, that's wacky. It's cool, wacky. But so Trans Am is as good as it gets from a overall, all things considered, racing.
now you just said that IndyCar and Formula One were your goal in that during that time too. I know that really a lot of American racers had kind of a bad taste in their mouth with F1 after what happened with Michael Andretti. That was kind of right around that time as well. What I mean, watching how Michael Andretti was treated in Formula One, did that ever do anything with you with your taste with Formula One? Is like, maybe not, or
Not really. I mean, I've always that's one of my strengths is I've always been able to see things pretty clearly, and so Formula One is what it is,
yeah,
And and I was I didn't have an idealized view of it. At some point I probably did, but once I was inside the racing biz, I mean, I was rooting for Michael, and it was I he didn't do himself some favors, and they certainly didn't do himself, and they didn't do him any favors. And
yeah,
so it was um, it always again I see the world as it is, not as I wish it was. So it's a little bit of a bummer and a little odd that you haven't had some more Americans that have said, I want to conquer that.
yeah,
You've got Gene Haas there, who is, but I mean, the number of Americans that have taken swings at America's Cup over the years, the Koch brothers and now Penske and all,
mhm,
a ton of people. And like of all the people that literally have money to burn here, and it's their money to spend how they want,
yeah.
but how hasn't someone that's worth $30 billion said, how is America not dominating Formula One? With our technology sector and our wealth and our innovation, our creativity, our number of people. How are we not? So we're not, but
No, and then I mean, it's like you know, with having Rossi being kind of the last big American name over in Formula One, I don't know. I think that the Europeans kind of look badly on us, or they say, "Oh, you guys are just a bunch of NASCAR drivers," or this or that. It's like, but so I love watching Rossi come back in Indy and just thrive and doing really well there. And then Scott Speed got his feel in the global rallycross and
yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, I saw that in my own little way when I realized Formula One wasn't happening and so forth. From a touring car sedan standpoint, DTM was as good as it got. And so
yeah,
I worked hard to try to make something happen in DTM and got nowhere. And I remember Norbert Haug, you know, um, I pulled every string I could to get introductions, and KK Rosberg couldn't have been cooler and actually had some time for me. Norbert Haug, all he wanted to do was stare at my wife's chest. And I was okay with that if it got, but I'm like, listen, I'm not looking for charity here. I'm just looking for a shot.
yeah,
So I know you look at me and you say, how could that big, tall, dorky guy drive? I'm like, maybe I can't, but give me a shot, and I'm pretty sure I can. And that. So, anyways, it is what it is. Rossi, he didn't get treated well over there. I heard a story from that Dr. Marco really just hated Rossi's dad, and that worked against him. And I'm like, can that really be true? No, not Dr. Marco. Gunther Steiner at Haas.
Oh,
Marco, I'm not a fan of either, but Gunther Steiner had a real issue. And there is a team funded by an American saying, we're not going to say it has to be an American driver, but ideally we'd love an American driver. And here's one who's won, the only American to win at all the junior levels in Europe, has a super license. And if that story is true, and I don't know if it is, if that story is true that you're not giving him a shot because you don't like his dad, tell his dad to F off and not come around and give him the guy. So,
anyway. Or let the dad do what Lawrence Stroll does and just buy the team.
Well, his dad can't do that, unfortunately. So
no, I know.
And that's my point. Is again, I'm not, he's Gene Haas's guy, whatever.
Yeah.
People get to do it, but I would love for someone to come along that's super patriotic, like Dan Gurney with Tech Money, basically, and says we're going to do this. And I loved, Gunther Steiner apart. I like Gene Haas's approach because he went over there. They treated him like the American A that they don't think that highly of, and the hillbilly that they really don't think highly of. And they are like, what makes you think you can be competitive right away? He's like, well, he kind of more or less said, I mean, how hard can it be? Is what he said.
Yeah.
And they looked at him. But here's a guy that figured out how to dominate one of the most precise, exacting, the way he made his billions is in a way that's as technical as it gets. And
exactly.
A lot of them, and he was right. He's like, how hard can it be?
So. Tommy, I really appreciate your time tonight. If you could I wanted to say 3 pieces of advice to a newer driver willing to make their way up. Just 3 quick pieces. What would they be?
It's funny when people say, how do I do this? I always say my first piece of advice is don't, because it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I could give you a list of 10 things to do. And back then it wasn't that obvious, but about the physical prep and all this stuff. And the sad part is you could do all of them and never get a shot. But if it's all you can think about, you owe it to yourself to kind of do all of it. And don't do it when the chance comes, do it before the chance comes. So that's kind of typical dad speak there, I realize. But, just really apply yourself and just try to understand it. I think in this new era, I don't know how to do my own data. To this day, I can't run the programs to look at my own data. In this day and age, all the kids can do that, but you should literally be good at every single aspect of it. That's part of it. The Sims part of it, understanding business and sales and marketing is a huge part of it. So that's 10 things and one thing at once. I guess.
And that's fine. My only other piece would be is don't shut down any chance that comes out. If somebody, if you're focused on, an open wheel ride or a sports car ride, but somebody comes over and says, hey, come try driving my quarter midget, or come try driving my Outlaw, or, come try driving my ARCA car, or come try driving my Formula 4 car, or whatever. Accept every opportunity that's out there, because you don't know where you're going to strive or what's going to be good for you or how that car is going to help benefit you in the next car you get into.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would also say the counterpoint to that is and this is what I liked about Rossi, is he was totally focused on Formula One. And so the other side of that is a lot of people are like, well, I'm happy doing any of it. I'll go NASCAR, I'll go sports cars, I'll go. And so I would say and you could change your mind, but be super clear on this is what I'm trying to do.
No, absolutely.
Now, I think, your point, I think you could learn from all of those things to help you on that. But I think sometimes people, because it's so hard, they're like, oh, I'll do whatever.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that lack of definition and focus on the goal actually.
And, I guess that's where I kind of messed up is, it was having that goal, but don't shut down any opportunity that comes to you, because that opportunity may be the next thing that helps you take that next step closer to your goal of what you want to achieve.
Well, and I honestly think you learn stuff, again, the different perspectives and the different things might actually help you understand, even if it's a midget, it might, on dirt, it might help you. And this is, Kyle Busch is a great example of this.
Yeah.
It might help you make a connection that helps you on a road race in NASCAR. Just because you see something a little differently, or all of a sudden something you've seen a zillion times, all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I never thought of it like that.
Well, and even going back to two wheels, that when we'd ride motorcycles, is we do a lot of training on dirt, because when we'd hit different situations on track on the bikes, it helped us, with the steering and the throttle, and if our bike starts to slide, it's the easier way to get out of it.
Yeah, there's a great example. 2 wheels to 4. I mean, on a motorcycle, in a car, you place the weight with the controls.
Yeah.
But some people don't ever think in terms of where's the weight when they're in a car. On a motorcycle, you learn pretty quickly. You better figure out where the weight is and how to get it where you want it, because it's everything. In a car, it's also everything. You just don't connect how important it is because you're strapped in one place. But that's basically, and this is, I guess, the final thing. Here, it's an interesting way to think about it. The difference between the worst driver in the world and the best driver in the world is a steering wheel that turns left and right. It's not even like an airplane. It doesn't even go in and out. Although Lewis Hamilton's does, I guess. But
now it does.
left and right, and you've got 2 pedals that transfer the weight front and back. And the difference between the best driver on earth that ever lived and the worst is how they do those things. And so someone can literally make a car absolutely dance with those simple inputs. So it really is understanding and practice and rehearsal and reps and so
all right.
Start there, but that's
no problem. So TK, this is the time where I want you to thank whoever you want to thank, plug whatever you want to plug. I know you're wearing your Torque Show shirt. Everybody needs to tune in and watch the Torque Show. Great, him and JB, Justin Bell. Always having a fun time on set. Great guest. If you are past episodes on YouTube or Facebook where people could check them out, or
everything airs live and lives on Facebook, on the Torque Show Facebook page. So there's some stuff on. Sometimes we cut out individual interviews, like Willie T, who was on one of our recent shows with Hobbs. Willie T's interview will be clipped separately on YouTube. But Facebook's the easy way to go.
Okay.
So Torque Show for sure at the IMSA races, and now we're doing it in between during quarantine. In terms of thanks, I'm surrounded. People that follow me on Instagram know my cats. So I got one of them sitting right here, and we're about to. This beautiful backdrop here in Santa Monica is about to go away, and they're going to be moving back into the warehouse that they lived in. So follow me on Instagram, Tommy Kendall 11. Twitter, same, and thanks to you and all the people that love our sport. And I guess it'd be appropriate to thank everybody that's been busting their tails and taking risks during the pandemic.
Absolutely,
keep us safe, and the ones that don't have a choice to sit home and stay safe are doing it in the midst of it. Real bravery, and hopefully we're back to normal life here pretty quick.
Absolutely. Tommy, thanks again for your time. Everybody, thanks for listening to the Uber to the Pits podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at ubertothepits.com, as well as our new YouTube channel. You could get in touch with me on our website at ubertothepits.com. You could info at ubertothepits email if you have any questions. Tommy, thank you so much again for your time. It was always a pleasure, watching you drive as a youngster, growing up watching you drive through all those years, and now being able to call you a friend and a compatriot in the industry. So thank you so much for your time, and stay safe and enjoy the last little bit of the backdrop there you have with you and your cats.
I appreciate it. Good luck to you, and good luck to everybody trying to make a career out of this.
All right. Thanks, TK. Take care.